Hello and welcome to Let's Talk. Today we are going to be talking about the situation in South Africa where there have been quite some crises really involving the killing of black African immigrants by black South Africans who blame those black African immigrants for their plight, whatever that plight is. We're going to be exploring some of that tonight. So I have some variable guests who are going to be exploring this with me. One of them is Mr. Emmanuel Bioh, who is from Ghana and resides here in the United States. And we also have Mathias Oni-Eseleh, who is from Nigeria, resides here in the United States as well. And Mr. Waheed Alabede, who is also from Nigeria, but has a very good life in Ghana. And so he actually has shuttled both countries and also resides here in the United States. Welcome to Let's Talk, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Right. So,
thank you, Dr.
Right. Ghana became independent in 1957. That was on March 6, 1957. So, Emmanuel, I'm setting the stage for you. Because in December 1958, Ghana was actually the first country where all of Africa met and decided that they were going to stand up to the West and demand change for black people in South Africa. So in that All-Africa People's Conference in Accra, Ghana, in December 1958, those Africans called on all countries. These were not just black African countries, those were all of Africa. They called on all countries to impose sanctions against South Africa. And after that, boycott movements began in so many countries against South African-supported businesses in the United Kingdom and in other Western countries. So that movement, the impetus for that movement was actually created from that meeting in Ghana in 1958. So Emmanuel, I'm coming to you and I'm asking you, so what is the relationship between Ghana and South Africa like right now?
Well, I would think that intergovernmental level, I think the relationship is still solid, except for the incidents in the recent past that seem to have created some bitter taste in the mouth of Ghanaians when it comes to South Africa. But from global standpoint, I would just say that yes, our relationship with South Africa is still solid.
Right. So the point really is that African governments are really working hard from that time to make sure that black people in South Africa became free. In fact, just taking off from that point in July of 1959, not that long after this, the conference in Accra, Ghana, the following countries in the West Indies and the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Grenada, and Dominica, banned imports from South Africa. They banned all goods from coming into their countries from South Africa because they demanded that the black people in South Africa should be free. The African countries didn't rest. In November 1959, the African Trade Union Conference, all trade unions in Africa, met in Nigeria and appealed to all people of African descent around the world, and in all democracies around the world, to impose sanctions against South Africa. So this would imply that there was some leadership, or at least a desire to get things moving in South Africa so that the black people will become free. So Mathias, do you think that South Africa would be free today, the black people in South Africa will be free today, without the efforts of all of those people from all of those countries around the world?
Good evening, Dr. Ohiro, and thank you so much for having me. This is such a wonderful show, and congratulations to you. All over the world, people are talking about your show. You're doing a wonderful job. Let me start by saying that I do honestly believe that without the efforts of all Africans, South Africa will not be free today. I know many 28 years ago, as a young college graduate, I was one of those who actually marched in the streets of Lagos, marching against apartheid and marching against white oppression in South Africa. And then in other African countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast, people stood up and spoke out against what was going on in South Africa. I think without those efforts, South Africa will not be a free country today.
I remember being a young man myself growing up in Nigeria, and we had President Obasanjo at the time. He was a military head of state. He was General Obasanjo. He nationalized British businesses in South Africa, in Nigeria actually, because they were doing business in South Africa, like BP. He nationalized them. He demanded that blacks in South Africa be free. And he began, I believe, and then after him, successive governments began to bring black South Africans into Nigeria to go to school for free in Nigeria. Some of them were my classmates and my schoolmates at the University of Ibadan, and they went there for free. And I recall that Buhari himself, the president-elect of Nigeria right now, the first time that he became head of state of Nigeria, his very first conference, I remember him clearly saying, I'll just paraphrase what he said. He said, if the black people of South Africa want to be free, and I have no reason to doubt that they want to be free, they are going to be free. But now this is where we are. Just this past week, Nigeria had to recall the country's ambassador and a few diplomats from South Africa. That's how bad the relationship is right now. So, Waheed, please talk to me about that. Why are we here?
I think one of the reasons why we are here now have to do more with economics than politics. The people on the streets of South Africa, the common man, they've not really seen the benefit of their freedom. Now, it's easy for the older generations to look at the past of the bondage and say that, okay, we are getting somewhere. But for a guy who was born after, or who was too young to really understand what was really going on during apartheid, there is no bearing for them. There's no way for them to know that what they have today could have been worse. All they know, which rightly so, is that the government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing for them. Let me just point to a few things that will let us see how South Africa have become. During apartheid, right until about when they handed over to the ANC, the rates, the life expectancy in South Africa was 65 years. In Nigeria, I believe it was about 40 years then. Now, as we are speaking, the life expectancy in South Africa is about 57, and Nigeria is about 50. So while it's still bad in Nigeria, there's improvements, and I believe it's the same thing in Ghana. There's improvements, it's getting better. But in South Africa, it's getting worse. Why will they have this kind of life expectancy? I would say it's because the healthcare system is getting worse. The economy, even though their GDP is far bigger than any other African country, the level of inequality in that country is also greater than in most of the other African countries. So you have a very few group of people, the same people who control the national resources before and during apartheid are still the same people controlling it after apartheid. So the ANC, the government in power, have really done nothing to make sure things trickle down to its people. And these people see all these other people coming from other countries doing what they assume they are doing well. They have a job. Now, it's easy for us to look at them and say, why couldn't you do it too? Why couldn't you do it? But it's not that easy for them to do, especially in a country where they also have social security network that make it impossible for some of them to actually get out of their problem. So wrongly so, they blame the immigrants, who they should be encouraging to come into their society to help them lift the country up.
Emmanuel, are we also talking here about a lack of leadership? Because we actually started by talking about what happened in Ghana, what happened in Nigeria, and how that actually just spread across much of the world, and why all of that led to a free South Africa. But there were statesmen in those African countries at the time. We'll just say that Africa right now is lacking in statesmanship. Are there statesmen left? Is it possible that there are no leaders? South Africa has a president, but is he a statesman? And if Waheed is right about a decline in life expectancy in South Africa, then where are we to put that blame?
There are a couple of things that I would like to inject into this conversation. And Waheed, I think you make good points in terms of overall development of South Africa. But when I put it in a bigger context, the whole continent of Africa, it seems to me that our biggest problem really is not, actually it is, it's leadership and understanding that you cannot run any institution or you cannot run any government or any social system without some type of structure and institutions to guide the conduct of the people and the people in government. And not just having an institution, but the ability to also enforce those institutions. So when we look at South Africa now, and when you look at all the sacrifices that Africa and African leaders made to end apartheid in South Africa, one would think that South Africa is for every African, and we could all flock to South Africa and live there, and because it's part of our DNA. However, post-apartheid governments have failed to put in place institutions sufficient enough to regulate the conduct of the individual citizens. So what we're seeing here in South Africa is not, well, people generally are putting the laws into their own hands and demanding justice on the street, instead of having a government protecting the rights and the lives of all, either citizens or foreigners. Because we don't seem to have that system in place. And if we had that system in place, I don't think people would be hurt on the streets by other people, other citizens of South Africa with impunity, as it did happen in South Africa. So the whole idea is we can have leadership, but our sense of leadership, I think, in my view, is a little bit different. People think of leadership as being in power, but failing to deliver on what a leader has to deliver on, and that is making sure that ensuring the safety and the well-being of the citizens and everybody who comes within that geographic boundaries. And I think that's what's happening right now in South Africa. We've lacked institutions, we've lacked the ability to enforce any meaningful institution to ensure that the lives of citizens and foreigners are regulated to promote public safety.
Mathias, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ohiro. One of the points that we tend to forget sometimes is that political freedom is different from economic freedom. South Africa, the problem in South Africa is an African problem. Many of the businesses in South Africa are owned by foreigners, which now makes it almost impossible and very difficult for South African people born in South Africa to have jobs. Over the past few weeks, I have friends from South Africa. I've spoken to a lot of my friends and colleagues from South Africa. It is a general African problem. Many African countries, there's a perception that there's political freedom, but they don't have economic freedom. Unemployment, even in Nigeria, is still more than 60%. College education means nothing in Nigeria. Even in colleges in Ghana and most African countries, entrepreneurship is not being taught. In many years back, when we were kids, carpentry, woodwork, home economics were taught in schools as a way of making people become entrepreneurs. So we got to go back again to our educational system. Are we preparing people to be independent? How do we increase unemployability amongst Africans? That is the core of most of the problems we're having in Africa. And we can look at political freedom, appetite. South Africa has been free. South Africa has been politically free for a very long time. But they have indeed not been economically free. The sustainability of any community depends on the ability of its people to be able to fund for themselves, find for themselves, and provide for themselves. We are too dependent on government.
But can I ask a question? But in what context, though? I mean, we as the continent attempts to attract investments from all over the world. I've always felt that you cannot attract investment when you don't have institutions that will protect or create an environment for people to invest and create jobs. So the lack of really good institutions, in my view, is one of our biggest challenges.
We can build those institutions. We can't just depend on only our government to build those institutions. I think for generations, we've depended on government. Private individuals can build institutions, and those institutions can support entrepreneurship. We don't focus on that.
Right?
I think if I'm looking at, if we really want to look at the major problem, I will agree with institution. And when I'm talking about institution, I'm not talking about political institution. Of course, political institution is what's going to make it work, but that's not what I'm talking about. The institution I'm talking about have to do with the structure on ground. A good example of the kind of institution that we don't have is the in most African countries, the law enforcement, the justice department. When you talk about simple thing as copyright and all this, these are the institutions. The property right is one of the major problems that we don't have. If you look at the list of all the countries in the world, the most developed country also happen to have property rights that is guaranteed. In Lagos today, you can buy a piece of land or any property and somebody is going to take over. There's no way investors will come in knowing that there's no guarantee that what I'm buying today will belong to me tomorrow.
Okay, whose responsibility is it to guarantee that?
Yeah, it comes back to the political system, but I'm saying we seems like Mathias said, we seems to focus a lot on the fact that they attain their political freedom. But sometimes political freedom does not give you everything. Economic freedom is what will guarantee them what they need. And here is where I'm tying it into it. Who sponsor the people who win elections in South Africa today? It's those with the economic power. It's not. Economic power is just for those at the top to answer to those who hold the. Political power is for those at the top to answer to those who hold the economic power. So if you want to fix that, we got to go through the economic system to fix the institutions. Politicians are always going to be politicians. You have to push them to get what you want.
Can one make the argument that some of the institutions that all of you are talking about were in existence before the black people of South Africa became free? Is that a plausible argument? Emmanuel?
Yeah, I think the white, both of government, they made sure they had a structure, they had levels of government, different levels of government who had to operate within certain laws that were either passed by the legislature or entrenched in the Constitution. And they were able to enforce that. But in our case, the level of enforcement is the problem. I think that after Nelson Mandela, post-independent South African government still had all those institutions. But the question is that to what extent are they being enforced? And to what extent have they modernized those institutions to suit the present political and economic climate? I don't think they've done that. To what extent has it become inclusive at the local level? To what extent are the citizens at the various local levels determining who should be the governor for a province, or even the chief executive for a district? I'm not too sure. I've not been to South Africa, and I don't think I'm privy to what goes on there to kind of make that argument. But if you have a government whereby people are not actively involved, whereby people don't have the right to withdraw a member of parliament for failure to function, and power is still concentrated in the hands of people who are appointed by the central government, we will have problems.
Okay, in the last 2 weeks, President Mugabe of Zimbabwe appears to have spoken from both sides of his mouth. He said once in the last few weeks, he was quoted as saying, South Africa is the only country where an illiterate gets angry because a doctor who happens to be a foreigner has a job as a doctor, and he, the illiterate, is angry because the doctor is working as a doctor just because he's a foreigner. But then, just a few days ago, after the Southern African leaders met, Mugabe said African countries, African governments should withdraw their citizens from South Africa. And he said, I have actually already brought 800 of my own country citizens back home. The others who choose to stay there are choosing to stay there. Every country has a responsibility to care for its citizens, and these foreigners should stay in their countries instead of going to overrun South Africa. So he was speaking from both sides of his mouth. But could both sides have been right, Mathias?
Dr. Ohiro, thank you for a wonderful question. I think, I actually read parts of his speech. I think both sides are right. The issues in South Africa, they're not excusable. Nobody can sit down here and say it's okay for them to treat immigrants the way they are. The issue is South Africa does not have the resources to provide for the number of immigrants going into South Africa for jobs. That is one of the issues. And then it is, like I said, an economic issue. It is an African issue. We got to find ways to provide for our people in Africa, all over Africa. We got to find ways to teach them skills that they need in this age, in this technological age. Africa is still behind in technology. We got to teach the skills that our people need. Unless we begin to do that, the future doesn't look hopeful. Issues and incidents like this will continue because African leaders are beginning to find out that they lack resources to even provide for their people. And they're beginning to discourage, in many African countries as we speak, they are discouraging immigration. They don't want people coming into their countries because they feel they've not been able to cater for their own people. Yet we need immigration. Immigration is essential to economic development in any country. And if we can't have that, how do we develop Africa? We can't have doctors, engineers, professionals, teachers. The sad thing about the incidents in South Africa is the very qualified teachers from other countries are moving back to their countries. And so people don't go to school. They can't go to school because they don't even have enough teachers. So you don't have enough professionals in South Africa. But the little ones, the few that you have from other countries are going back because they're afraid they're going to be killed. So how do we develop Africa?
So Waheed, I am coming to you because one of the, this is a very important series, that we have just been going through. But I'm coming to you because one of the things that we have established in this conversation is that there were structures in South Africa. The structures were in place, and that was because the South African whites never thought they would leave. So they developed South Africa to the point of comfort for themselves. And now, since they became free, Emmanuel has explained to us exactly what happened. And let me take you back to a speech that a Prime Minister Botha of South Africa gave to the South African Parliament in 1985 while he was defending apartheid. He said, quote, "By now, every one of us has seen it practically, that the blacks cannot rule themselves. Give them guns and they will kill each other. They are good for nothing. They are good for nothing else but making noise, dancing, marrying many wives, and indulging in sex. Let us all accept that a black man is the symbol of poverty, mental inferiority, laziness, and emotional incompetence. Isn't it plausible, therefore, that a white man is created to rule the black man? Come to think of what will happen one day if you woke up and on the throne sat a kafir, which was a derogatory term used for black people in South Africa. Then he said, can you imagine what will happen to our women? Does any one of you believe that the blacks can rule this country? So isn't today's South Africa a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Before I answer, let me first of all say, I don't know why they are always scared of what blacks will do to their women. Let me just put that somewhere. Now, going to what the apartheid regime left, the structure that they left, is actually one of the reasons why we have the problem we have now in South Africa. We might have agreed that they left a structure, but what structure did they leave? They left a structure that makes sure their people are always at the top of everything in that country. Yes, the blacks have political freedom, but they really don't have anything else. Getting a job as a black South African in South Africa is harder than if you were white in the same South Africa today. So we could be talking about that, their structure, and not really look at the fact that that structure was built for a purpose. And until that structure is taken down and a new one is built, before South Africa will be truly free. Now, coming to the main question that you asked, that what is happening in South Africa today does not necessarily justify what Botha was saying. It does not. This thing is happening in every country. There was a time in the United States that they had their own race riots. We also know what is currently happening in the country now in different parts of this country and in Europe, all over. That does not mean the black people cannot rule themselves or they are incompetent. The structure of the world itself make it impossible for the black people to actually rule. Have you ever seen any black leader that really want to do the right thing and stay in government for more than 2 years?
Well, I think someone might also ask you, have you ever seen how many black leaders have you seen in any black country who really want to do the right thing?
Well, I would say I've seen some. Of course, they might have been military leaders who were cut short, so we never really would have known where they would have gotten to. We know there are people who have been able to start. I once read about the same president-elect that we have now. I read an interview some time ago, I wish I could find it, where he was talking about loans and the aid that they get from the foreign countries. That one of the reasons why he was refusing then was because when they gave him this loan, they are insisting that it must be, the contract must be carried out by companies from the country that is giving the loan. And even when he was arguing in favor of, okay, it's a loan, why don't we use the people that we have here? Do you know when every time you execute a contract within a local community, the money gets spread around. It's kind of help the economy to move on. But when you bring in the loan from outside with the contractor, the money goes back to the country where it's going back to. So now, that's why if any of our leaders are ever able to stand up to them, they will remove them. So I kind of give our leaders a slack in this area. But the corruption is what we should focus on the leadership. It's not really what they want to do.
Okay, let me just say this, Emmanuel.
Yes.
When you look around the world and you look at the countries that are led by, just focus on Africa alone, and just look at the African countries. Would you say that the presidents, most of them, I know that in some countries like Botswana, they are doing Rwanda, they are doing really good jobs. But in most of the African countries, would you say that, or would you not say that the leadership of those countries really are not acquitting themselves well? When you look at it within the context of what Prime Minister Botha is saying, he may have been wrong, but doesn't it just appear as if they are proving every day that they're making the point themselves that black people are not capable of ruling?
Well, if both the statements based on certain indicators, which he did not mention why, he didn't give us any indicators by which he was making those judgments. But overall, let me put it this way. As a clinician, I will look at it from Maslow's standpoint, that if you, as a father, and for that matter, the president of Ghana, for instance, is the father of the nation, and you as a father, you sit down and look down on to your children, and you notice that the basic necessities of life, safety, number one, food and shelter, these basic things are not being delivered, then you ask yourself, what kind of father are you? And secondly, your kids are starving, and you have the audacity to be riding in Mercedes-Benzes, Lamborghinis in Ghana. Your cronies are riding in those cars when there are no roads. For me, that's an indication of failure, because you have not delivered the basic thing that your people or your children need just to survive at the basic level of human function, according to Marx, shelter and safety. And we have not been able to deliver. On the basis of that, I think we failed our people.
Mathias, jumping off from what Emmanuel just said, aren't we a little hypocritical when we're talking about South Africa? If you look, for example, in Nigeria, Boko Haram has killed over 16,000 people on the watch of President Jonathan. The same President Jonathan is criticizing South Africa, and the same President Jonathan withdrew the ambassador to South Africa and some diplomats because he was so angry that South Africans are doing this, when in his country that he leads, over 16,000 people were killed on his watch by Boko Haram, his own citizens, and he's supposed to be the father of those children and women and men. He did nothing, really. So aren't we being a little hypocritical when we are focusing on South Africa?
Absolutely not. I don't think we are. You know, Boko Haram is a terrorist group, and terrorists are difficult to control. I mean, I don't think there's any government that has total control over what terrorists do. They have their own military. They are an illegal group. I think the issue in South Africa is very different, because I think the issue in South Africa could have been handled differently by the government. You know, if you follow closely what the government has said, on one side, you want to almost think that they support what's going on in South Africa. On the other side, they come out, you know, days after incidents to say they're against it. kings are against it. But I think the issue with Boko Haram in Nigeria, the government is against it. It's a terrorist group that's so difficult to fight. And so I think they're different. It's apples and oranges.
Waheed.
Well, I think I will agree with him in one side that Boko Haram is a terrorist organization, like he said. They are not. There's a difference between inaction of government protecting its people when there is rioting. A rioting is usually not an organized event. It's not like there's a group somewhere who is bringing arms into South Africa and targeting all these people. They are the same people within those countries. So what they are doing, I think we should not confuse what they are doing in terms of the number of people who are dying there and in Nigeria, and then look at that and say, oh, we are being hypocritical. No, we are not. The government in Nigeria did not do a good job. I agree with that. They did not do a good job in making sure Boko Haram stopped right when they started. They did not. And let me just correct one thing, because this thing has been going on that Nigeria withdraw its ambassadors from South Africa. It is true in one sense that they did, but it wasn't. You know that I was against the government of Jonathan, but I would defend him on this. It wasn't him. That was why he fired the guy who was in charge of that. So when you said that he was angry because of it and he withdrew the ambassador, I think we are making it as if he actually knew the ambassador wasn't being withdrawn.
Doesn't that also you haven't you just indicted him?
Yes, of course, I'm indicting him.
Yes, you have just indicted him that he doesn't know what's going on in his own government.
Exactly, just like he didn't know that there was a statement out there that said he spoke to the king of Morocco. He did not know for 5 days that Morocco have withdrawn their ambassadors to Nigeria. That I'm not arguing with all those. I'm saying on that level of where he's withdrawing his ambassador from South Africa because of what is going on. Meanwhile, something is going on in his own background that he couldn't control. I think just because he didn't know about it, I think I will give him a pass on this.
It is very interesting because I've actually seen interviews of him where he just made the same point that he just made. He cannot be blamed for anything that happens in Nigeria.
I'm not saying
because he has said, like, no, I wasn't there when it happened, so why are you blaming me? No, he has actually made some of those points, and and you are not his supporter, I know, but his supporters have made the same kinds of arguments. But the fact is that in African history, even with those of us that are sitting here, there was a time when Ghana kicked Nigerians out of Nigeria, and then there was a time when Nigeria kicked Ghanaians out of Nigeria. So we go through these periods. But shouldn't there be someone, or shouldn't there be a time when we actually begin to say, when a country has problems, these are the reasons why there are these problems. It is not because of the people that are coming in and working hard. So who is it in Africa that should be leading that, providing that education, instead of just blaming scapegoats? Because if, like Mathias just said, it is South Africa that is going to end up without teachers. It is those children that are going to suffer. So who has that foresight now to be able to say to the people of South Africa or any African country, this is a crisis and it needs to stop? Who is calling these people in South Africa to order? Or who should call them to order? Emmanuel.
Well, again, I would say that because we don't have an effective government, we don't have a government that is based on meaningful working institutions, because there are some countries that encourage immigration, okay? And so by calculation, if there's a need for doctors, there's a need for teachers to be in South Africa. there should be a proper way of recruiting those personnel. And if they come into those countries or they come to South Africa, I think there should be institutions to make sure that these people are safe to perform their functions. But if we don't have any enforceable institutions that will guarantee the safety of those people that you need to run your economy, that in itself is a failure of government. And I think that, you know, what's going on in South Africa is a failure on the part of the government to guarantee the safety of foreigners.
I am sure that all of us here at one point or another were fans of Bob Marley. And who remembers Bob Marley singing Africa Unite, which was as far back as the late 70s, Africa Unite. And it seems like this is the time for us to be singing that song again. So should we be doing the same thing over and over? And Emmanuel's point is actually crucial, which I think is a point that every one of us agrees with, that when African leaders cannot even provide a basic services to the citizens of their countries and are flying around the world and purchasing multi-million-dollar homes,
Yes,
paying cash for them. So we, on the one hand, there's a question of responsibility that is not there. But on the other hand, isn't there also a question of consequence? For example, even the African leaders that we just talked about, the political leaders who do this international, that's one. But who is going to mete out any consequence to the traditional ruler in South Africa who actually began this whole thing? Waheed.
Oh, that's all right. Well, it's a shame that in order to actually mete out any kind of punishment to this kind of traditional ruler, whether it's in South Africa or in Lagos, it's a shame that we have to look up to the ICJ, the International Criminal Court. That's the only way. There is no way any court. You remember, I think we discussed something about the way we respect our traditional institutions before, and it's hard for anybody in any African country to be able to trample upon them, unless for a few who actually look at the history of the traditional institutions and just don't take any nonsense from them. One thing that we don't do, which I think contributes to this problem, is that there is no room for discussion in most African countries. People don't discuss openly, especially when it comes to elders or traditional rulers. It will be very hard for somebody to go on TV in South Africa and probably start blaming this guy. Now, don't forget that it's beyond this. It's beyond the traditional ruler in South Africa. The son of the president of South Africa is saying the same thing. That's powerful. This is not just some traditional ruler somewhere. No, it's not the only one. So, to your question, we will have to look outside of Africa to solve that.
Mathias, should we be looking outside of Africa to solve Africa's problems?
No, Dr. I don't think so. I think no doubt there's need for reform. There's need for leadership reform. I think no doubt Africa needs transformational leaders. And how do we build transformational leaders? We build transformational leaders by going back to basics. And going back to basics means reforming our educational system. We have to start by reforming our educational system and building leadership skills with our educational system. Right now, the focus of education in Africa is not leadership skills. We're going to start going back to basics. Not just that. Our reform, the reform that we advocate, must start with us. This is a good beginning. Talking about these issues is a very good beginning. Reform doesn't start by people sitting around and not talking about the issues. Reform starts by people talking about the issues and advocating for what is right. We will be ignoring some basic facts if we believe that the reform that we advocate only starts with education. Education is key, but economic power is key also. And we can do that. So we have to believe in ourselves that we are the change that Africa needs. If we believe that, we can do it.
Emmanuel.
Certainly we can, but it's going to be an uphill battle for us. Because the reason why I say that is, let's look at our individual homes. I'm not talking about our individual homes here in the United States, because our kids are able to advocate for themselves and they know their rights and they can demand it. But let's look back in Africa, how we raise our own children, and how that replicates itself at all levels of our educational system. That everybody goes to school, even at the university level, at the PhD level, they all graduate by acquiescing to the directive of the professor. None of our universities has any review procedure for a student who feels aggrieved by a professor. The same thing applies in high school. Whatever the headmaster says, the principal says, goes. No student has the right to challenge that. So we have duplicated this submission and subjugation through our entire educational system, from cradle, the time we were born, till the time we graduate. And we go into the field with the same attitude. You can't challenge your boss. You can't even question or critique what he's doing in the best interest of the company. And as a result, we are docile. We are so docile to a point where something really has to change. And I believe strongly we can. Those of us who are lucky enough and we're privileged enough to have this level of education and to have the opportunity to have this kind of discussion, I think we need to begin to build alliances, organizations, to a point where we'll be able to galvanize. For me, the only way we can do this in Africa is to begin to look at the middle class, at least people who have some level of education and people who can reason with us, and people who can understand that a system that we want to inject into our traditional systems or our local government will provide them some type of a future. And then work around with those people on issues and matters, on goals that are deliverable, because that's where the hope is going to come from. Because as I know, every Ghanaian would like to enjoy the fruits of his labor, and they would like to see tangible delivery.
No, it's all right. So, go ahead.
So my point is, yes, it can be done, but not until we really build alliances in our countries back home in Ghana, and then help them see that, yes, whatever they want in life can be done in such a way that it will bring equity to society and safety for all, we will not be able to go anywhere. So I believe we need to begin to have these discussions, and not here in the United States, but begin to establish relationships with people back home in Ghana and the rest of Africa.
Yes.
Can I just add something to what he said?
Yes.
Okay, I think it just took us back to something that we began with, institutions. That's part of the institutions that we talk about. It describes the institution from the government to the private life and how we become what we have. The kind of leaders that we have today is actually what he just described. You have presidents or bosses or governors who have all their advisors, and the advisors are yes men. They are waiting to see what he agrees with before they give advice. So they are not really advising him one way or the other. They're just looking at the president and think, oh, does the president want the policy this way? And then they analyze that way.
So this is what I like to do. I like us at this point to actually begin to round up. So the question that I have, it's not my last question, by no means is it. But the question that I have now is, what are the lessons for the rest of Africa from the South African situation? What are the lessons for the rest of Africa? Waheed, I go to you first.
Well, the lessons for the rest of Africa from everything that we have seen now is that we need to go back to the basics. The structures need to be in place. We can't have a situation where people do what they do, regardless of whether it's wrong or right, and they can get away with it. As long as this is there, nothing is going to change. There's nothing we do that will make it. But I agree with Emmanuel that we need to start creating that connections. We need to start building those kind of relationship so that we can spread this message. If somebody is in government and they break the law, or they are traditional rulers and they break the law, they should be punished, and people should see it. It's not just that somebody get punished. Perception is as important as the actions itself.
Mathias, your final comments.
Dr. Ohiro, thank you so much. I think the lessons for Africa is sustainability, sustainability, sustainability. We've got to be able to sustain our economy. And in order to sustain our economy, we got to make people employable. We got to employ our own people. We got to create jobs. We have to encourage investors to come into our country and build our economy. And for us to do that, we have to go back again to what Waheed has been saying and what Emmanuel has been saying, building those infrastructures. That's got to be the key going forward.
Emmanuel, your final comments.
Well, I think they said it all. I mean, without any good political infrastructure, without good institutions, without accountability, there's no way we would succeed in attracting investors. Or would it not just attracting investors? I would not go to Ghana if I had all the money in the world to invest in Ghana when I cannot guarantee the returns on my investment. So that's a fact. We need definitely to have institutions that can make the country governable so that people can invest.
You know, this is a discussion that we are, of course, going to continue to have because one of the things that I have heard here is everyone's push for alliances. And I think that one man who lived, who actually was one of the best artists ever, said, if you want to make a change, you look in a mirror and make that change. So as I am looking at you, I'm looking at myself as well, because I can see myself and we can all see ourselves. So we have the mirror right now. And my hope is that we'll continue to have this dialogue, and that this dialogue will lead to something practical, so that we can actually begin to cause those little ripples that will lead to major change for Africa. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I know that Emmanuel has to run. I don't know where he's running to at this time. But hopefully we can all meet one day and just sit down. Not here, really. I would like us all to travel together, have sessions in Africa, and have discussions. So that would be really great. I wish you all a very good night and enjoy what is left of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
So last week, my brother.